with nature, in nature, for nature, and as nature. So the end goal for both nature-based education and our invitation is to actually rediscover and open our hearts to understanding that we are nature and start living and learning as nature. And in this way, we can definitely reestablish our kinship relationships with the natural world, with the living world, and in such a way that we can start, coming back into being in right relation. And with this, addressing many of the issues that we have created from living in separation. So the invitation is really to activate and bring nature to the center of all types of education, both formal, non-formal, and informal, and really look out into nature, because that's where we'll understand everything better, such as Einstein used to say. So back to you, Dominic.
Fantastic, Lewis. Thank you so much. And you can see Valeria has put in the chat references to some of the work that Lewis has been leading around helping get to this definition of nature-based education. So nature-based education is a concept which is gaining massive momentum at the moment. And Mike, we'd love to turn to you now and hear about some of the great work that's been going on in Canada since we were all together in Salzburg before we introduced the statement itself.
Yeah, absolutely. A bunch of really interesting things have been happening over the last couple of months. And I was actually going to start a little bit broader than just in Salzburg, because there's the launch of the Nature-Based Education Geoportal that the IUCN did at the World Conservation Congress with Ed. Can you hear me now?
Yes, you've come back.
So there's launch of the Nature-Based Education Geoportal at the World Conservation Congress last month with Esri Global and the IUCN. And then shortly thereafter, about 3 days after, we launched the Canadian Centre for Nature-Based Education with about 30 partners from across Canada the end of October. And what that really is that's a partner ecosystem really working with non-traditional partners. So we're bringing in people. Obviously, there's some organizations that have been doing this work for years, like the North American Association for Environmental Education. But we're also bringing in groups that you wouldn't think of being as nature-based educators. We've got Apathy is Boring, who are a democracy organization. So they're bringing it in because, of course, nature, it turns out, is a political issue. We're bringing in groups like the Learning Disabilities Association in Canada, because it turns out that nature-based education is a phenomenal way to teach kids how to read. And we're doing all this really because there's lots of groups that are doing work around environmental learning, around nature-based learning, and we want to start building in a real network ecosystem with the goal that this is going to be the first of these centers around the world, learning from each other, learning how to have better lessons for each other, and most importantly, I think, making sure we've got groups that, as I say, normally never would fall into this space. So we don't end up working completely in silos as we've been doing for a long time. So I'm really excited about this, and I'm really hoping we can see more and more of this as the sector progresses.
Great, thank you, Mike, and thank you for joining at such a very early time in your morning in Canada. Catherine, let's come to you. You were the lead author for the statement.
Lovely.
So
yeah,
to introduce it.
Thank you, and thank you to all of my colleagues from Salzburg for all their insights. So this statement represents both a collaboration and the foundation of a movement. What it does is helps bring all of our partners, our supporters, our friends together to speak with one voice and to say that we're committed to these shared priorities and shared actions. We're building our network across the Salzburg Fellows and across more diverse sectors, as Mike was just sharing. anyone and everyone who shares the goal of bringing nature into the heart of learning. And we invite you all on the call to join us. And the purpose behind the statement, I think, as I wrote in my recent article for Salzburg, like eating healthily and getting enough exercise, we all sort of know, like deep in our bones, you know, that getting outside is good for us. And we also have decades of robust science that backs that up. And we also know from analysing some of the policy work going on around the world that these efforts are key to achieving some of those global policy targets, the biodiversity framework and the SDGs. So what this statement does is brings together all of that knowledge, all of that wisdom, and sets our priorities and a roadmap for how we're going to achieve these ambitious, vital, connected goals together. And my wonderful colleagues will talk about each of these in turn, but I'll just give you a really brief overview of how we're going to get there through 7 kind of top level actions. And the first one is imagination and agency, and that means just doing it. So working out what is within our control as carers, as teachers, as parents, as leaders, as play workers in the informal, non-formal and formal education sectors, and every policymakers and everybody in between. What can we do every day with our own agency to reimagine how we can reconnect with nature and bring nature into the centre of learning? The next point is around integrating nature into education. So back in 22 at the Transforming Education Summit, 30 national governments committed to implementing nature-based education. So through this statement, we're calling on them to deliver on those promises and asking for other governments to join them. And then we must also be learning from those who never lost that human-nature connection. Wherever we can, when we're doing this work, we must bring in and co-design with Indigenous communities and those who have the deep knowledge about how to embed nature into education. We do this through the action of partnering with educators to integrate nature into the core of learning. My colleagues will talk about that later. And by greening our schoolyards and transforming them into nature-rich environments. And we want 1 million more green schoolyards by the year 2040. It can be done, and my colleagues will tell you about how we're going to do this later. And then coming with that is obviously an investment in how to measure progress and funding the development of a global indicator so that we can measure how we're moving the needle on nature-based education. And then finally, of course, resourcing. And we call on all funders whose portfolio includes education, human health, well-being, and the planetary crisis to direct resources that they have to support this movement. And it's back to you, Dominic.
Thank you, Catherine. So as Catherine said, we're going to go through different component parts of the statement, and different colleagues are going to both introduce that and say a little bit about their own work in the space. So Maria Angelica, can we pass to you first for the imagination and agency part of this?
Hi, everyone. Thank you to
Hey.
join us. I will speak about imagination and agency. And before that, I want that you think about our daily life, because sometimes it's easy to forget the connection that we can share with the natural world. Yet today, more than ever, we are called to reimagine that relationship. This begins with 2 powerful human capacities. One is imagination, the ability to envision possibilities beyond what we see, and agency, the understanding that our actions, no matter how small they are, can be meaningful and shape our environment and our collective futures. And here I want to bring Paulo Freire, philosophical and educator from Brazil, who remind us that there is no change without dream, and there is no dream without hope. So imagination is a force that moves us and that opens new pathways that allow us to rebuild our connection with nature, with intention and hope. And also imagination allows us to picture new ways of being outdoors, new forms of learning, and new possibilities for community well-being. An agency, on the other hand, turns those ideas into concrete steps. And those steps don't have to be grand. They can be as simple as pausing to notice the changing season, cultivating a small garden on a balcony, or choosing to walk mindfully through a neighborhood park. These seemingly ordinary moments are not just routines, they are acts of care that benefit both our physical and emotional health. If we see for research, they are showing that engaging with natural spaces reduces stress, improves concentration, and strengthens resilience. And also we will take care more of nature if we are connected to it. And this work is not an individual journey, it's a shared responsibility. As say Catherine, so parents, carers, teachers, school leaders, play workers, non-formal educators, policymakers, and community members all exercise collective agency. The choices that we are making, they make, what activities offer, what the spaces create, what values emphasize, shape how children and adults learn to relate to nature. With creativity and imagination, they can design experience that invite exploration, curiosity, and care. They can transform scholar yards into living classrooms, promote outdoor play as right rather than privilege, and advocate for policies that ensure access to green spaces for all. And policymakers to play a critical role in recognizing nature as essential infrastructure for well-being, education, and equity. So to finalize this part, reconnecting with nature is not just a personal practice, but is a societal commitment. Thank you.
That's fantastic, Maria Angelica, and thank you for sharing that and giving the wider context to this part of the statement. So we're going to move on to the next part of it, which is around integrating nature to education. And it's a great pleasure to introduce Margaret Otieno to speak to this part of the statement, who I think joined in the nick of time for this element of it.
Thank you very much. So I missed the first part, but I'll go straight away to integrating nature to education. We call on the 30 national governments who committed to implement nature-based education at the Transforming Education Summit to accelerate progress, share best practice, and encourage other countries to make commitments and take action. Integration of nature into education is key in providing learners with diverse experiences that enhance their cognitive, physical, and emotional growth. The importance of embedding nature into education system as part of the broader sustainability transformation is highlighted in the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration. Integrating nature to education improves the academic performance of students, enhancing their concentration, memory, retention, and problem-solving skills through real-world hands-on applications of classroom concepts. There are several approaches in integrating nature education. For example, nature literacy, because it ensures that students are able to acquire, access, and use information about nature. Nature-based outdoor experiential learning, learners field ecology programs to national parks, forests, reserves, wetlands, mountains, and other areas of conservation interest can give students an opportunity to explore local system and to identify floral and other species. Greening school subjects, sustainable environmental projects, art essay, and creativity in nature. All these are approaches in integrating nature to education. Nature labs and citizen science, creating a natural classroom setting, and training of teachers, which is very important for multiplier effect, and also just empowering the teachers with the information that is really, really needed in integrating nature to education. Thank you.
Meg, thank you so much, and thank you for persevering with the connectivity issue. So let's move on to the next part of the statement, which is around ancestral wisdom and indigenous knowledge. And Dixon, over to you.
Yes, thank you so much, Dominic. Our objective is to bring nature into the center or the core of learning. And to be able to do this, we have to consult the experts. The experts are indigenous communities and indigenous people because they have a track record that they have not lost or severed their connection with nature. But it's sad that educational programs have sidelined indigenous knowledge or marginalized indigenous knowledge. So via this statement, we are saying that if nature-based educational initiatives will be successful, we have to bring on board indigenous knowledge. We have to ground nature-based education in indigenous knowledge. When we look around the world, the natural elements that have been preserved in their pristine forms are those that are in the regions of indigenous communities. And the ancestral wisdom, many people think, is resting in the past. But the ancestral wisdom is time-tested, is a valid form of science which is practical, and we are saying that we should include it in our efforts to bring nature as the core of learning. And we can do this by co-designing nature-based educational curricula with indigenous practitioners. We have to bring them on board. And the relationship has to be a genuine one, a sustainable one, not just a one-off relationship. And we want the relationship to be respectful and non-extractive. We don't want to also tokenize ancestral wisdom, never. We want to respect indigenous people and then bring them into the classroom, as we've done with our basic pedagogical model in teaching native trees. Elders with experiential knowledge on native trees have been brought into the classroom to teach. And we also flip classrooms into nature, place-based education, and it has been very successful. So our call to educational leaders is to ground nature-based educational initiatives in indigenous knowledge. The next slide. Now, as we do this, it is very important that we measure our progress. If we are not able to measure our progress, we wouldn't know whether or not we are chalking successes with our nature-based educational initiatives. So what the Salzburg Fellows have done is that we are pushing for the development of a global standard for measuring ecocentric learning. We don't have it in existence. All the indicators that we have are fragmented, and all of them, majority of them, I must say, sideline indigenous knowledge. But the global standard we are pushing for as an indicator for measuring ecocentric learning brings or synthesizes different knowledges. Ancestral knowledge is on board, academic knowledge on board, professional knowledge on board, and we are bringing them as tesserae in building a beautiful mosaic global standard to measure ecocentric learning. How would we even know that our students are changing their perception of the biosphere from the anthropocentric view to ecocentric view? How can we know? It's important that we measure. And that is why we are pushing for the development of this global standard or metric. And the good thing about the global standard metric we are pushing for is that it is culturally grounded and it takes charge of the different ecological realities in several countries. And we are asking well-meaning funders to please fund this proposal, make it a reality so that we can have a global standard for measuring ecocentric learning. I put a certain indigenous Ghanaian symbol there. Maybe you can take me back. That symbol is called Sankofa. Sankofa. And what it literally means is that it's not wrong to go back and fetch. We have lost our connection with nature. But now, with this statement, we are saying that we can reconnect back our lost connection with nature. It's not wrong to reconnect. It's not wrong to reestablish. And that is what we are pushing for. And we cannot leave indigenous knowledge or ancestral wisdom behind. And we have to also measure our progress as we move forward using this global standard. Thank you so much.
Dixon, that was fantastic. And thank you for doing double duty with both the ancestral wisdom and the measuring progress slides. So let's go over to Becca, if that's okay. And if you'd be happy to talk about the relationship between, or partnerships between, educators and conservation.
Yeah, thanks so much, Dominic. And thanks everybody so far for all of you shared. I am Becca Katz. I'm a lifelong educator and co-founding executive director and self-titled instigator of awesomeness at Good Natured Learning. And our work is in schools. We're equipping educators to embed bite-sized, apple a day, sustainable nature connections into the way they teach. And we do this so far in Kenya and the United States, and we're always looking for more schools to partner with us. So I'll use that plug to just say, if you are a school out there and you want to bring nature-based education into the practice right away, then that's great, and we would love to work with you. I think in speaking to this piece of partnerships, I get to talk about my very favorite thing, which is how nature-based education is good for so many things, which makes it a really perfect area for collaboration and deep partnership between educators and conservation, between educators and the healthcare sector, between educators and policymakers, et cetera. There's all kinds of opportunities for connection and collaboration and really deep partnership with mutual benefit. So we know in this work that none of us can do the important work of tackling the planetary crisis alone. We're all on this shared blue-green ball Earth together. And so this is an opportunity where we really sought to elevate and celebrate nature-based education as a unique approach to simultaneously support learning, children's and educators and people's well-being, and also the health of the planet. And so thinking about how there's all this opportunity. So here with nature-based education, what's good for education, what's good for educators, what's good for students is also good for the planet. And so this is this really awesome synergy that we wanted to speak about. And knowing this, we know that nature-based education offers what I would say is we would say is an unprecedented opportunity to bring together conservationists and educators in a true partnership, right? Where collaboration is indeed mutually beneficial. And I think this requires conservationists to really begin by honoring educators' expertise and meeting them as full collaborators, recognizing the local context in which educators are operating, and embracing and working within the assets and the constraints that are on the ground in reality in education systems, informal, formal, non-formal education systems, and then aligning resources and support to first support the mission and priorities of education, and then knowing that the two most predictive factors that shape young people into adults who love the earth are adult role models who care about nature and frequent experiences in and with nature. And so when we have nature at the core of learning in whatever education capacity we're talking about, we actually have both those things combined. And so people and the planet can win in that way. And so we really think of this as this opportunity to really drive really excellent learning, well-being, and well-being defined in terms of human well-being and planetary well-being, knowing that those two things are bound up together. So back to you, Dominic, and thanks.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Becca. I'm very envious of your backdrop as well. It's nice and warm where you are. Brenda, I mean, for us, for Salzburg Global, a lot of our work in this space really began with a partnership with Children and Nature Network around global lessons for greening school grounds. And so it was fantastic to be able to revisit some of that work and see it as such a strong component of the statement. But Brenda, you're much better placed to introduce this. So can I pass to you?
No, you are too, Dominic. Thank you so much. And thank you, Valeria, for putting that in the chat already. Yes, I am Brenda Kessler. I'm with the Children in Nature Network. And I'll add that this has really been work from many, many partners. Some of you are here. And so it's been a collective work. But just to add to some of the things that my colleagues have already said, when we talk about nature-based education, it's critical to think about like the enablers and the environments in which will allow to bring nature into the heart of learning and playing. So proximity to nature, big or small, even if it's a small neighborhood park or a pocket park, we call it in the US, a green roof, or a schoolyard. These spaces are really critical if we're going to scale nature-based education. That proximity will allow that daily contact with nature and the ability to reach as many people as possible. So public schools are often some of the top landholders in any city. Not everyone has a national park nearby, but they do have a schoolyard. We've seen that as strategies that are really gaining a lot of momentum throughout the world, just looking at schoolyards as the possibilities that are there. And how we use this land really matters. It matters from a land use perspective, but it also matters because school environments are where children are already spending a significant portion of their day. These are spaces that teach children, how do they relate to their environment, and they're the spaces that will allow for that relationship to the natural world to develop. And at the same time, like these asphalt schoolyards, we're seeing from a climate aid or from an environmental perspective, we're seeing how they contribute to extreme heat, to flooding, air pollution, and many of the challenges that we're facing today. And they also fail to promote, children's healthy development, mental and physical health and learning. But schoolyards can be so much more. You're looking at a picture of one there. When we add trees for shade, vegetation, and natural play elements, these spaces can really transform communities. These spaces, when they're open to the community during out of school time, they build connection, resilience. They are safe, family-friendly spaces that create belonging. And unlike many large-scale projects, schoolyards are already there. So like Dominic said, in 2022, many partners came together. Many of you, I see you here, and we created a landscape scan to highlight and disseminate some of the successful approaches from around the world. And I'll say that even in the last 3 years, it's been almost 3 years since that, or 2.5, we've seen momentum, real momentum throughout the world in this. We see cities and districts and national governments embracing the idea of school grounds that they can serve a much larger public purpose. And many of you here are leading that work today, and we welcome you to share any links to your work in the chat. We want to continue learning about that. But during our time in Salzburg, a group of us came together and, with a shared sense of urgency and possibility, and we were asking ourselves, how do we inspire more people to take action? How do we help school communities not only imagine this, we've been talking about this for a while, but how do we really help them get there? And so those conversations sparked a very early framework of a global campaign, one that celebrates what's already working and what's already happening, but also lifts up the leadership in different parts of the world and mobilizes new partners, because we know there are probably new partners out there. So I think Catherine mentioned it, and it says it there. We have this idea of reaching 1 million new schoolyards by 2040. Sounds ambitious, but we think it's totally achievable. And we know that there are many other partners already there that are ready to contribute in different ways. Of course, funding is always needed. So today we're inviting you to join us. If this is something that resonates and that makes you excited, we invite you to let us know. We are still in the ideation stage, but we're just really welcoming anyone that believes that school grounds are not a luxury, but something that we really need to do for the impact of children's lives, learning, and well-being that will go way beyond 2040. So I'll drop my email, and Ian, other partners from my working group that are here. We welcome to continue helping us launch this campaign and sometime in the near future. Thank you, Dominic.
Great. Thank you, Brenda. One of the projects that Brenda and I co-host as a monthly community of practice for educators who are interested in greening school grounds. We meet on the third Wednesday of each month, so the next community call is tomorrow. And if anyone here is interested in joining that, then please feel free to email either Brenda or I, and we can add you to the mailing list. It's an hour-long call at 3 p.m. Central European Time on the third Wednesday of each month. It's a lovely group to be part of. Catherine, can we go back to you to bring us home and finish the introduction of the statement?
Lovely. So the other piece that is contained in the Salzburg Statement is this framework, which is the in, with, for, as nature framework, which actually Luis mentioned in his introduction. And this was something that guided us during our time in Salzburg during the program. But I think, like all the best frameworks, this sort of, we're calling it a continuum. It feels less like we've sort of created something new and more like it's kind of organizing and naming something that has always existed. And it's part of the Be Nature project work, which was led by our colleagues, Matteo Giusti, who joined us in Salzburg, and other scientists and collaborators at the Institute of Sustainability and the Surrey Wildlife Trust. So I'm standing on the shoulders of giants here as I introduce this framework to you. But it's something that, for me, fairly established in education policy, but fairly new to nature-based education work. This was something that really helped me understand kind of what we're aiming for, what the end goal is. And it very helpfully outlines that we can't just start with, taking kids on a week-long immersive trip into nature. Some of them we can, but with a lot of kids, it's about kind of firstly getting them to be comfortable and confident in nature. So that looks like kind of moving traditional lessons outside into a natural context, educators taking learners outside to a play space, a park, hopefully a green schoolyard, or a natural area, just to kind of start to encourage them to feel comfortable in that space and to start to be curious. And that already will begin to improve their physical and psychological well-being. The next stage of that continuum is to start learning with nature. So this is around kind of designing activities that use materials that are available in nature as the kind of vehicles for learning. So it's nature shaping the lesson rather than simply hosting it. So this might include journaling about nature experiences, making art with natural materials, or a hike to learn about the kind of connection between human activity and a nearby river or forest, and then using kind of inquiry-based learning in natural settings, math skills to analyze tree growth, something like that. Then once a learner, and it's not just children, we're talking adults too, once they're starting to feel comfortable in nature and working with nature, we start to be able to understand being kind of for nature. So this is where learners start to care for and become stewards of nature, taking actions that kind of boost human capacity to care for nature, protecting against climate change. And that could look like making a pollinator garden, conducting energy or a waste audit to inform school or community policies, or restoring a patch of habitat in their community. And then finally, as Luis eloquently put it at the beginning of the call, the goal is around kind of restoring that oneness with nature, recognizing that we are nature and being as nature as learners. So this is about seeing yourself as part of nature, not separate from it, building empathy, recognizing yourself as part of that ecosystem. And educators are able to kind of embed Indigenous knowledge and include practices that relate students with their land and promote belonging, interconnectedness, and a sense of gratitude. So I'd really encourage you to check out the work that Matteo and his colleagues have done in the Be Nature Guide, which I think there'll be a link to in the chat, because it's really practical advice. It really explains this continuum in a way that's really actionable, and it gives us all ideas about what we can do tomorrow to continue our journey on this path. Thank you.
That was great. Thank you, Catherine, and thank you to everyone who spoke, and thank you to all of you for joining us for the launch of the statement. The statement is now live. You can access it there. It's a two-side document, so designed to be very easily shareable with other pieces of advocacy like this that we've used. We know that they have been translated, they've been presented to different policymakers or people who hold power over different education systems or within education systems. They have been used to structure teacher workshops or other kind of educator workshops, where we'd be very happy to offer more advice as to how the statement can be used. And, you know, following Virtue's lovely offer at the top of the webinar, if anyone on the call would like to help with translation of this, then we would welcome that. We already have offers for Turkish and for French and Portuguese. So please don't hesitate to get in touch if you would like to learn more about how it can be used, or you'd like to, you can offer some help with the translation of the statement. We have 15 minutes for questions. So please feel free to raise a hand or unmute and come in with questions. And then, you know, anyone who was part of the program, feel free to step in. Thank you, Patricia. Anyone who was part of the program, feel free to step in with answers. There was a good question in the chat from Hannah Jones McVeigh that it would be great to put to the Salzburg Fellows. So Hannah says, I'm going to read it out in case anyone is on their phone and can't see it. So Hannah's question was, Hannah, you could unmute and do it.
Hello, hi. I was just interested to kind of hear about any experiences that people had or thoughts that people had around kind of equity of access. So in the UK, we work with schools that are defined as being kind of in areas of higher deprivation, and we tend to find, and this is a tendency and a generalization, but it is a relatively kind of accurate one, that the schools in areas of high deprivation, and certainly schools in areas of high urbanisation in the UK, tend to have less access to green space, if nothing at all. And I've seen incredible, inspiring things done with very, very small pockets of land, but that is not equitable to much larger kind of school estates in other parts of the country. And also, you know, when we talk about kind of like going out to green spaces, there are further barriers, particularly for those schools in just getting out to those in getting out to those green spaces in so many different ways. So just really interested to hear people's thoughts on how we navigate this commitment equitably.
Thanks, Hannah. Lewis, are you coming in with an answer to this or a different question?
It was a comment, but it can relate to this in the sense that when we talk about nature-based education, we're not only talking about the outdoor education and all these other engagements. We're also talking about how we can bring nature into the learning experience. So just imagine, you know, kids coming into a classroom anywhere in a very urban area of Latin America and entering a classroom where birds are singing, of the ecosystem surrounding the schools, where you have pictures projected of the forests or whatever. And the first experience those kids have as they join the classroom is listening to nature and then having a teacher just asking, kids, listen deeply. What are all these birds talking about? And engaging in a creative poetry or creative art experience to try to understand the conversations of these birds in the forest, to lead after that to start understanding the species or the birds that are actually engaging in those conversations. So this is a way of bringing nature into the core of a classroom without having to go and move and do all these other things. So part of what we're trying to invite is that nature plays a much greater role not only in creating outdoor education programs, which are needed and essential, especially bringing nature into the school grounds, but also creating the experiences inspired by nature and giving nature a place of relationship or relationality where humans and nature can grow and learn together as a community so they can recognize each other as subjects of the relationship. So I think this is something that's really important, sometimes overseen when we're talking about the experience of learning and nature in the center.
Thank you. That's really interesting.
Cheryl, are you coming in on the same point? Cheryl, are you also speaking to Hannah's question or a different question? Can you hear Cheryl? Can you hear me?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sorry, Dominique. I wasn't sure you were calling on me. Yeah, thank you. So let me just build on what Luis was saying and respond to a couple of other comments. Early on, Pat Mayer asked about the terminology, and I just want all of us not to get too concerned about. We're talking about so many different ways of connecting with the natural world, and we're trying to bring a greater emphasis to that disconnect that exists and positive ways to connect people. So I don't want anybody to leave this call thinking that there is not great validity to many different approaches, including obviously the indigenous wisdom. And the last question that just came up having to do with what's going on internationally, certainly IUCN and the Commission on Education and Communication has a whole area of emphasis on nature-based education. So there is work that will help, as the question just asked, with the COPs and other kind of work going on. But most of all, this is really a unifying emphasis. Don't worry, though, if you're using other terms sometimes, whether it's place-based education or some of the other terminologies throughout the world. It all matters, but what's most important is that we shift the emphasis and realize that we are nature and that we need to make sure this is much more manifest throughout people's lives and the education of children throughout the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Cheryl. Really well made points. Meg, I think you were next.
Yes.
It's good to see you. Thank you.
Thank you. First of all, I really want to apologize. I think I was a bit rushed when I came on, but I would like to share with Anna about what I do when I am working with urban schools without green spaces to make sure that I integrate nature within the education. There are a few things that I do which she could borrow from, like having double-story gardens. That is a garden in the sack, kitchen gardens, and that is so easy because they're just placed at the corner of the buildings. And with that, then I can I'm able to expose and connect children with nature through planting, watering, and just taking care of the plants. Simple things like bird feeding tables and bird baths will ensure that we attract birds, but at the same time, exposing children to the different types of birds that are found within the school compound. Things like waste projects, using the lunch leftovers. So you introduce composting, doesn't need a lot of space, and generally using nature to deliver the school curriculum. Instead of just having some arbitrary essays for comprehension, you can have an article on elephants and ask questions about that. Climate change and ask questions about that. And with that, you'll be integrating nature within the education system. Thank you.
Thank you, Meg. Really helpful. Mike, you were next.
Yeah, couple of quick thoughts for you, Hannah. One of the things that I struggle with on a day-to-day basis is that, as near as I can tell, in every community and every city on Earth, the places that are the most nature-rich tend to be the richest places. And one of the things that we have to really think about is how are we going to collectively push on people to not only find the small activities, but when there's funding schemes that are in places to make things more nature rich, that those places go to the places that are where it's most needed. So here in Calgary, I often point to there's a schoolyard this year that is across the street from one of Canada's largest urban parks. But 25 years ago, they built a forest on the school ground. But 10 years ago, they built their first outdoor classroom. Then they built a nature-based playground. Then they built another nature-based playground. Then they built 2 more outdoor classrooms. It's a very affluent part of town. They didn't need to build any of those, and they got government funding to do that. They got funding from foundations to do that, and they had a massive park across the street. One of the things that we should be doing is pushing on all those funders and saying, listen, if you're going to be funding these things, fund them in the places where it's needed, not necessarily the places where they've got the best grant applications.
Well
Thanks,
said. Becca, I think we've got time for your comment, and then we'll bring it to a close.
We don't, it's okay. But one of the things I was going to say, and Hannah, you clearly recognize this based on some of the examples you raised in your question, but so yes, you can sort of like, I think that the answer is a temporal one, right? So like now in this moment, right, we do the best we can within the assets and the constraints that are on the ground in reality, because that's what we've got, right? And so if that's bringing nature into the classroom, because that's the best that we can do in this moment, that is better than having a stale classroom without that nature, right? And then looking at sort of like what's happening now and what's happening next, and how are we driving the change that drives more equity, to the point of what Mike's talking about, what Brenda was talking about with green schoolyards, and really making sure that resources are going to make sure that the people who currently have the schools and places and neighborhoods that currently don't have access, right, are getting that access. And so these are, parallel and both equally important efforts to say, do the best with what you can to integrate it. And I will say, having implemented programming in informal settlements in Nairobi, all the way to like mountain towns in Colorado, where there is, a lot of immediate outdoor access, that the actual impacts of these like bite-sized tiny nature connections they trend the same, right? There's this universality. So even though it's not quite as immersive and not quite what we like strive for in terms of the deep immersive nature connection that we hope all people can have and be exposed to, we still see really profoundly positive results, even doing it with really tiny, like a garden on a rooftop in an informal settlement, all the way to, being out in a forest immediately adjacent to your school and everything sort of in between. And so I think that is really promising for the now, right? And then still advocating for like better nature access for all in the next.
Yeah, I think I wrote that down because I think it's a really good way to frame our thinking moving forward as an organisation. We day in, day out see the huge benefits of the small implementations that we offer schools across the country in these situations. And but I think I'm always striving for more, and that equity it always rankles me. But I think you framed it really well, and it was really interesting hearing all your thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you for the question, Hannah. We're almost at time. We will share the link to the recording of this with everyone who'd registered for it. Please feel free to share it with colleagues who you think might find it useful. Please also share the statement far and wide. We hope that it's a useful thing to be able to offer to the nature-based education and wider education and conservation communities. We will also share all of the links that have been shared in the chat in the same email after this. As Valeria has just posted, she's about to post, we have a newsletter where we give information about all of our upcoming programs and work that partners and fellows have been involved in. So do please sign up for that if you're interested in learning more. And a final thanks to TUI Care Foundation, the IUCN, Canadian Wildlife Federation, World Wildlife Fund, who helped make the program possible, and to all of the fellows who contributed time and expertise, both during the program and in the preparation of the statement, and to everyone who joined this call today. We hope that you all have a very good rest of the week. And thank you for spending the last hour with us. Take care, everyone.
Thank you, Dominic and Valeria, for guiding us throughout the process.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Bye. Thank you.